Hi, it's Jael from Cell Based Nutrition, and today we're going to talk about pain and self worth. Earlier on, I posted a reel about what I would have loved to have told my younger self based on all of the wisdom that I have developed living with chronic illness and chronic pain. And I think the biggest lesson I would have taught her was how to divorce the pain, the illnesses, the sickness, the disability from my self worth and self esteem. The world really works hard to unite you to your trauma, and to see you as just your limitations, as if you're not a fully functional, well-rounded, holistic human being who also happens to live with a disability or an illness. My self-worth started tanking as my sickle cell got progressively worse. Through my childhood, obviously I had pain, but it wasn't really until puberty for me in adolescence where the complications of my sickle cell became much more apparent. When I was at sixth form, I had a hospitalization. I had pneumonia, which triggered a sickling crisis, and I was in hospital for 6 weeks. I missed an entire half term of my AS levels, and there was a massive recovery period after being discharged and finally being able to return to school. And it was the first time that I felt a disconnect. You know what school's like. You're there every day with the same people, and it's just natural that an absence of that long is going to sort of impact how you feel about fitting in. And that feeling lasted for several years as I went in and out of workplaces and had to deal with illnesses. I struggled during my PGC, which was my postgraduate training to become a teacher. Again, I had periods of illness. I needed extensions and started internalizing that I felt like a burden, that I felt like I wasn't enough, that I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't do this because my body wasn't able to function in the same way as other people's bodies can function, especially when it comes to stress. My body isn't very stress tolerant. Stress triggers pain for me. And so being in a stressful academic environment and also having placements in school where you have classes that you have to teach and you're constantly being monitored and observed and assessed, it made me question whether or not I was good enough, even though I knew academically, intellectually, I was good enough, but whether or not my body was strong enough. My first job post graduation, I got sick there in my third year, I believe, at the school. I remember not feeling well on return from a school holiday, knowing that something wasn't quite right in my body, but knowing that I needed to attend work on the Monday. And I went in, and as the day was progressing, My body got weaker and weaker. My chest felt heavy. My breathing was labored. I knew that something was wrong. And I remember going to my head of department at the time and saying, hey, can I leave early? I need to go to the hospital. There is something wrong with my body. I feel like I'm having a sickle crisis, but I feel like there's something much worse happening. And she looked at me with such skepticism and such distrust, and I will never forget the look on her face, but I was adamant. I knew that something was wrong. I was feeling weaker by the minute. They let me go. They arranged cover for my afternoon classes, and I presented myself at A&E, and within a few hours I was admitted to hospital. And that was another 6-week stay. I had bilateral pneumonia. One of my lungs collapsed. That kicked off a sickle cell crisis, and it was just a cycle of pain and infection and weakness, and it was awful. Now, in and of itself, you know, I have wonderful family and close friend support. You know, people came to rally round and see me, but I had friends at the school that I taught in who were not in my department. And as I started getting better, you know, week 4, week 5, you know, they decided to let me know how the land was lying at work. And I was horrified to find out that my department were speaking so terribly about the situation that I had left them in, as if a sickle cell crisis and pneumonia is something that you plan and make happen. You know, there was no sympathy, no empathy, no compassion for the fact that I was fighting for my life in hospital. And they were trash talking me as if I was on holiday. And I'm the sort of person who, when I find out that people are not loyal, when I find out that people are hostile, I make plans to remove myself from that situation. And so when I was well enough to be discharged, and then when I was eventually well enough to return to work, I started thinking about my exit plan. I started applying for jobs everywhere. I applied for a job in Fiji, I applied for a job in New Zealand, I applied for work across the Middle East, North America, and of course schools across London where I was living at the time, and just desperately trying to find a way to exit that situation. I felt deeply uncomfortable when I returned, knowing that my department, who I have to work so intimately with, I have to share office space with, have to attend meetings with, that they spoke so liberally and freely to people around the school as if I would never find out. I remember the day that I handed my notice in, because I had found an international teaching position. And I remember as I was interviewing and applying for jobs elsewhere, that we were getting ready for the next school year, so timetabling and so on. And I really feel that as punishment for being ill and taking time off, and therefore my department having to pick up the slack and arrange cover and so on and so forth, that they created my timetable with some of the most difficult classes and some of the courses that teachers in my department did not want to teach. And I remember knowing that come September I was not going to be there, so I acquiesced and agreed, and my head of department was quite surprised that there was no pushback, because my timetable was horrendous for the following academic year. I knew what they were doing and I didn't care because I had my exit plan. And the day that I told my department that I was leaving, my head of department was furious. Absolutely furious with me. Other people in the department were shocked, but she was furious. One of the things that she said when she caught me alone was, "Did you know that you were leaving when we did the timetable?" And that was at that moment, I was justified, because I knew, or I had suspected, that the state of my timetable was because of, I don't know, the additional work that I had given them by daring to, be sick, daring to be hospitalized. As if hospitals keep... I started teaching when I was 22. So by this time I was 24, 25. As if hospitals keep young 20-something-year-olds for weeks on end if there's nothing wrong. And she was she was livid, and she asked, did I know that I was leaving when I had agreed to the timetable? And I just didn't answer, because what was she gonna do? They spent the last few weeks of term frantically, well, the last half term, because you've got to give sufficient notice when you're leaving a teaching position. They spent the last half term negotiating with each other about who was going to take the class. I mean, they literally piled my timetable with the worst classes, with the most difficult and challenging students. And so, there was lots of negotiation between other teachers, who was willing to take on what. They needed to create a timetable for the new member of staff who was going to come and take over from me. And, they couldn't set up a new member of staff to fail, even though they could set me up to fail. So they had to change the timetable. And I started spending less and less time in my department. Luckily, as I said, I had friends in other departments, and so I would spend time with them. Because my self-esteem, my self-worth had taken a massive hit. I started internalizing the horrible things that people said and were doing to me, and almost blaming myself. And if it wasn't for my friends and my mother at the time, just reminding me that despite the fact that I'm a disabled woman, I am a great teacher, because I had demonstrated this. Another school in another country had offered me a teaching position, and I got offered the job on the spot at the end of the interview. So that sort of gave me some validation. But school, and then my first experience of illness with employment really did a number on my self-worth. And I wish that I knew then what I know now, which is people are going to be ableist, and for me not to internalize it, for me not to take on board their ignorance and their judgment. And I hope that this little story time gives you some courage, especially if there are any young people listening to me who have disability and chronic illness. Yes, you are living with your disability and you are living with your sickness and you're living with your pain. But other people's judgments of what that means for you, that's not your burden. That's not a you problem. It's a them problem. And as a person who lives with chronic pain and chronic illness, we unfortunately have to deal with things like guilt and isolation and decision fatigue, and sometimes a lack of guidance in terms of how to navigate life in general, but also work and school. And this is why people need community and not just information. And knowing this has led me to develop a program. It's a group coaching program called the Pain and Fatigue Liberation Method. I will be opening a small group for people who are living with chronic pain conditions in the spring. I'm so excited to be able to offer people the opportunity to go deeper, to give them guidance and wisdom that I wish I had, but also use my qualifications in complementary therapy, naturopathy, and nutritional therapy to give practical, science-backed, evidence-based techniques on how to moderate and mitigate our experiences of pain, the frequency of pain, the severity of pain, and of course, ways to mitigate the debilitating fatigue that we struggle with. So if you are interested, keep listening out. I will be putting out more information over the next few weeks, and I'm really excited to work with those of you who want to work with me. So I'm Jael from Cell-Based Nutrition. It's been lovely talking to you. I would love you to remember that your body is not broken. Your cells are just undernourished. And I will see you in the next video.